The morning my world collapsed, I was merging onto Highway 71, heading back to Fort Cavazos after a routine medical appointment in Austin. The sun was blazing over the Texas Hill Country, and I remember thinking how beautiful the wildflowers looked along the shoulder. Then my phone rang. It was Maria, my housekeeper. The woman who had cleaned my home for 10 years. The woman who had never once called me during work hours. "Ma'am," she whispered, her voice shaking so badly I could barely understand her, "don't come home. Pull over and check the cameras." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. What happened? "Please, just look." There are moments when your body understands danger before your mind does. Mine did then. My heart started hammering against my ribs. A cold sweat broke out on my palms. I took the next exit, pulled into the parking lot of a closed barbecue place, and stopped beneath a faded sign advertising brisket by the pound. I opened the security app on my phone. And everything I thought I knew about my life disappeared. My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm a captain in the United States Army, stationed at Fort Cavazos, Texas. I've served for 22 years. I've deployed overseas, managed logistics for entire battalions, and trained hundreds of young soldiers. I've faced mortar attacks, convoy ambushes, and the kind of heat that makes you question every life choice you've ever made. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I was about to see. My husband Daniel and I had been married for 18 years. 18 years of building a life together. 18 years of shared dreams, quiet mornings, and whispered promises. We met when I was a young lieutenant fresh out of officer training. He was handsome, charming, and absolutely convinced that being married to a soldier was the greatest adventure life could offer. I believed him. His parents, Judith and Harold, had welcomed me into their family with open arms. Judith baked cookies for my unit every Christmas. Harold helped us buy our first home in Killeen. They called me their second daughter, and I believed every word. For years, life was good. Better than good, it was the kind of life people write novels about. Then things started to change. Daniel began working late. He said his financial planning business was growing. I was proud of him. I encouraged him. I told him to follow his dreams while I followed my orders. That's what military marriages do. They adapt. They sacrifice. They endure. But somewhere along the way, I stopped paying attention. I stopped questioning the late nights, the secret phone calls, the way he'd stiffen whenever I walked into a room unexpectedly. I trusted him. Completely. And that trust was about to destroy me. I tapped the first camera feed on my phone. The living room appeared. And there was my husband, Daniel, standing beside the couch with his arms around another woman. My breath caught in my throat. He kissed her slowly, comfortably, like this wasn't the first time. Like this had been happening for months. Maybe years. She was wearing my cream cardigan, the one I kept folded in the hallway closet because the house was always too cold. A half-empty bottle of wine sat on the coffee table. He'd opened the good Cabernet my battalion commander gave me after our last inspection. For several seconds, I simply watched. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe it was an old recording. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Then the woman laughed and touched his face. Daniel smiled at her in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in years. My phone slipped against my palm. I caught it before it hit the floorboard. "Maria," I said when I called her back, "where are you?" "In the laundry room." "What are you doing there?" "I came back for my blood pressure pills." I heard voices. "I thought you came home early." "Can they see you?" "No. I'm hiding behind the dryer." "Leave through the garage. Don't take anything except your purse." She hesitated. "Mrs. Morgan, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner." "Maria, listen to me. This is not your fault." My voice sounded steady. I was grateful for that, even if the rest of me was not. Then, movement appeared on the living room screen. A blue suitcase rolled into view. The same blue suitcase I had watched my mother-in-law take through the airport doors less than 30 minutes earlier. Judith and Harold were supposed to be on a flight to Seattle. They were supposed to be boarding an Alaskan cruise. I had hugged them goodbye at Austin Bergstrom International Airport that morning. Judith stepped into my living room laughing. For a second, I convinced myself I had to be looking at an old recording. There had to be some explanation. Maybe the airport camera had glitched. Maybe Judith had forgotten something before security and turned back. Maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion. Then I noticed the timestamp in the corner. 11:47 a.m. Live. I watched Judith set the suitcase beside the couch, while Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Well," she said with a grin that was easier than I expected, "I honestly thought she'd insist on walking you all the way to security." Daniel shrugged. "She never questions family." The woman Daniel had been kissing laughed. "I told you, Daniel. She's too trusting." My stomach dropped. Not because of the affair anymore, because all three of them were laughing together. Maria had been right. This wasn't some secret relationship my husband had desperately tried to hide. His parents knew. Maybe they had always known. I forced myself to keep watching instead of reacting. Years in the army had taught me something valuable. Panic makes people careless. Patience lets you see the whole battlefield. Judith looked toward the dining room. "Did Maria leave?" "I think so," Daniel answered. "She cleaned this morning." The other woman frowned. "You're sure she didn't see me?" Daniel waved a dismissive hand. "She's 61. She barely notices anything." I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because Maria had probably noticed more about our marriage than I had. I immediately called her again. She answered on the first ring. "I'm driving," she whispered. "Good. I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner." "Sooner?" There was a long silence. Finally, she sighed. "I've seen that woman before." I closed my eyes. "How many times?" "I don't know exactly." Another pause. "Maybe 6. The number hit me harder than the kiss. 6 visits. Not one mistake. Not one terrible decision. A routine. A pattern. A secret life that had been hiding in plain sight." "You never saw anything inappropriate?" I asked quietly. "No. They were always careful." "So why didn't you tell me?" "I wasn't certain. Mr. Morgan always said she was a client." That sounded exactly like Daniel. Always a reasonable explanation. Always calm. Always convincing. Maria continued, "But today, when your mother-in-law hugged her, I knew. There was no introduction, Mrs. Morgan. They already knew each other." That tiny detail somehow hurt more than everything else. Judith hadn't accidentally discovered the affair. She had welcomed it. She had probably encouraged it. I disconnected and replayed the footage from the beginning. This time I wasn't watching Daniel. I was studying the room. Coffee cups, 3 of them. A bakery box from Shipley's. Fresh. Someone had planned this morning. Then I noticed another camera angle. The driveway. At exactly 11:39 a.m., a black SUV pulled in. Judith and Harold stepped out. No rideshare. No airport shuttle. Harold opened the trunk. Instead of luggage for a 2-week cruise, there were only 2 small carry-on bags. The large blue suitcase had been empty. A prop. They had never intended to leave Texas. I zoomed in until the picture became grainy. Harold shook Daniel's hand. Then he hugged the other woman. Not politely, like family. A memory surfaced without warning. 3 months earlier, Judith had cancelled Sunday dinner because she and Harold were spending the weekend in Waco. Daniel hadn't gone to church with me that morning. He claimed he had an important client meeting. I suddenly wondered if they had all spent that weekend together. How many holidays? How many birthdays? How many times had I walked into a room after everyone had already stopped talking? My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Hope your drive back is safe. Love you. I stared at the screen for several long seconds. Then I typed back, just left Austin. See you tonight. 3 dots appeared. Sounds good. I looked back at the camera feed. Daniel smiled as he sent the message. Then he kissed the woman again. And a few seconds later, Judith walked over carrying a thick manila envelope. Across the front, written in black marker, was one word. Attorney. I sat in my truck for another 10 minutes without turning the engine back on. The July sun beat against the windshield, and the air conditioner struggled to keep up. Around me, people came and went from the barbecue restaurant as if it were any other Tuesday. A retired couple climbed into an RV. A father helped his little granddaughter into a pickup truck. Normal life carried on. Mine had quietly fallen apart. I took one slow breath and called my battalion executive officer. Sir, this is Captain Morgan. Rachel, you headed back yet? I'm running into a family emergency. I'll make the briefing remotely if that's acceptable. There was a brief pause. You've never asked for special treatment. Take care of your family. Thank you, sir. I hung up and immediately called Linda Brooks, the divorce attorney a fellow officer had once recommended. Her receptionist answered. I'm sorry, Ms. Brooks is booked all afternoon. It's urgent. What kind of urgent? I looked back at my phone. My husband doesn't know I've discovered something. Within 30 seconds, the receptionist came back. Ms. Brooks can see you at 2 o'clock. Linda's office overlooked Lady Bird Lake in downtown Austin. She was probably in her early 60s, calm, neatly dressed, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen every kind of divorce imaginable. She listened without interrupting while I showed her the camera footage. When Daniel kissed the woman, Linda didn't react. When Judith walked into the house, she simply folded her hands. When the manila envelope appeared, she leaned forward. Pause it. I froze the image. Can you zoom in? I enlarged the frame until the writing blurred. Still readable. Attorney. Linda nodded slowly. They're organized. You mean the affair? No. She looked directly at me. I mean whatever they're planning. That sentence landed harder than I expected. She wasn't interested in the cheating. She was interested in the preparation. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. Linda handed me a yellow legal pad. I want you to think like an investigator. Okay. Not like a wife. That one hurt. But she was right. Together we began making a timeline. When had Daniel started working late? When had our bank statements stopped arriving by mail? When had Judith suddenly become interested in helping organize our financial paperwork? One memory after another surfaced. About 6 months earlier, Daniel had insisted on switching everything to paperless billing. It'll save clutter, he'd said. I had agreed without thinking. Another memory. Judith had volunteered to keep copies of our house documents inside her fireproof safe. Older homes sometimes have electrical fires, she'd said. At the time, it sounded thoughtful. Now it sounded calculated. Linda circled both events. They were building something. Before leaving, Linda gave me one instruction. Don't confront anyone. I don't think I can pretend. You have to. She slid a business card across the desk. If they're preparing for divorce, they'll expect anger. What they won't expect is a patient woman collecting evidence. Driving back toward Colleen, I stopped for coffee at a Buc-ee's. Normally, I loved wandering through the aisles picking up beef jerky or pecan pralines for soldiers in my office. That afternoon, I barely tasted the coffee. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Hey, babe, he said cheerfully. How's the drive? Fine. You still coming home for dinner? I should be. Mom and Dad just landed. I nearly laughed. Landed already? Yeah, flight was early. The lie came so naturally. No hesitation. No stumble. Nothing. After we hung up, I pulled into a quiet parking space and reopened the driveway footage. The timestamp was unmistakable. At 11:39 a.m., my in-laws had walked into my house. At 11:52 a.m., Daniel had texted me that they were boarding. Now, barely 2 hours later, he claimed they'd already landed. 3 impossible stories. 1 confident liar. I started the truck again. Then another thought hit me. If Daniel was willing to lie this casually about something I could eventually verify, what else had he already hidden? That evening, after logging into our joint investment account for the first time in months, I found my answer. Nearly $186,000 was gone. I stared at the screen until the numbers stopped looking real. $186,247.18. That was how much had disappeared from our joint investment accounts. Not withdrawn all at once, transferred. Small amounts over nearly 8 months. $10,000 here. $15,000 there. $25,000 after Christmas. Each transaction had a bland description, portfolio adjustment or asset reallocation. If I hadn't been looking for trouble, I probably never would have questioned any of it. I took screenshots of every page before logging out. Then I sat at my kitchen table listening. The house was quiet. Daniel was upstairs taking a shower, humming to himself. Just an hour earlier, he had kissed me on the forehead and asked if I wanted grilled salmon for dinner. I had smiled. That sounds nice. The words tasted like cardboard. For 18 years, I had believed I knew this man better than anyone. Now, I wasn't sure I had ever really known him at all. The next morning, I drove back to Austin before reporting to Fort Cavazos. Linda already had a legal assistant waiting with a checklist. Today, she said, we collect facts. Feelings can wait. It sounded cold. Oddly enough, it helped. We spent nearly 3 hours going through every account I could remember. Checking, savings, retirement, brokerage, college savings for our niece whom we'd promised to help through nursing school. Linda frowned more with each document. Rachel, has your husband always handled the finances? Mostly. And you trusted him? Completely. She nodded without judgment. That's common. Then she turned her computer screen toward me. I searched Bell County property records. 3 properties appeared. I looked at the screen. Our home. A small rental house. And a lake cabin outside Burnett. I blinked. We don't own a cabin. Linda pointed at the ownership history. No. She paused. But Daniel did. According to the records, he had transferred the cabin to Judith for $1 6 weeks earlier. $1? I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so absurd. You don't sell a lake house for $1, Linda said calmly. You hide it. That afternoon, I met Maria at a small cafe in Harker Heights. She looked exhausted. I hardly slept. I know the feeling. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I keep wondering if I should have said something months ago. I reached across the table. You told me the moment you knew. That's all I could have asked. I suspected. That's different. She looked down. I've worked for your family for 10 years. No. I shook my head. You've worked for me. Her eyes filled with tears. I couldn't betray you. You didn't. For the first time in 2 days, I felt something besides anger. Gratitude. Without Maria, I would still be living inside Daniel's carefully built illusion. Life on base continued as if nothing had changed. Morning formation, staff meetings, equipment readiness reports. One afternoon, a young lieutenant complained because a supply shipment was arriving 2 hours late. Normally, I would have smiled. Instead, I found myself thinking how strange life was. One part of my world was collapsing. The other expected me to discuss fuel inventories and maintenance schedules. Somehow, that routine became comforting. The Army didn't care about my marriage. The Army simply expected me to do my job. And I still could. That Friday evening, Linda called. I have good news and bad news. I'll take the bad first. I believe Daniel intends to file for divorce. I wasn't surprised. And the good? He's already chosen the timing. What do you mean? He isn't planning to serve you now. Linda paused. He's waiting until after your 6-week training deployment to Fort Irwin next month. I closed my eyes. Of course. He wanted me hundreds of miles away while he emptied the house. He thought distance would leave me too overwhelmed to fight back. Linda's voice softened. Rachel. Yes. I don't think he realizes you've already changed the game. Neither did I, but I intended to. For the next 2 weeks, I lived 2 different lives. At home, I smiled over dinner, folded laundry beside Daniel, and listened as he complained about traffic, clients, and the Texas heat. We watched old episodes of Blue Bloods in the evenings like we always had. Sometimes he'd reach for my hand. I let him. Not because I'd forgiven him, because I needed him to keep believing I knew nothing. During the day, I was building a timeline with Linda. Every receipt, every property record, every bank transfer, every lie. It felt less like preparing for a divorce and more like putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle without the picture on the box. One Thursday afternoon, I was eating lunch outside headquarters at Fort Cavazos when my phone buzzed. I think I found what they've really been hiding, Linda said. Worse than the affair? Much worse. By the time I reached her office, she already had several folders spread across the conference table. She pushed one toward me. Read this. It was a sworn statement Daniel had filed months earlier while refinancing one of his business loans. Halfway down the second page, I found the sentence. My wife is frequently absent due to military obligations and has effectively abandoned the marital relationship. I stared at it. I never abandoned him. I know. Linda nodded. You've deployed twice in 18 years. Both deployments were less than 9 months. I kept reading. Daniel claimed he managed the household alone. He claimed I had chosen the army over my family. He claimed he expected our marriage to end years ago. None of it was true. My eyes burned. Not because I wanted to cry, because I suddenly realized how long he had been rewriting our story. That evening, I drove to our church in Killeen. Not for a service, just to sit quietly for a few minutes. Pastor Allen happened to walk through the fellowship hall. Rachel. He smiled warmly before noticing my expression. Everything all right? I almost said yes. Instead, I asked a question. Has Daniel ever talked to you about our marriage? His smile faded. A little. What did he say? He hesitated. I probably shouldn't. Pastor Allen, please. It's important. He sighed. He told me military life had changed you. He said you were never home. He asked us to pray that you'd find your way back to your family. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because strangers believed them, because people I respected had been quietly praying for a problem that never existed. Daniel hadn't just lied to me. He had lied about me. The next morning, Linda called again. I have something else. I'm almost afraid to ask. You remember the lake cabin? Yes. I found where some of the missing money went. She emailed several documents. Over $140,000 from our investment account had paid for renovations. A new dock. A remodeled kitchen. Custom furniture. Every invoice had been issued before ownership was quietly transferred to Judith. So I helped pay for a house that isn't even legally ours anymore. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair. For a moment, anger almost got the better of me. I wanted to drive home. I wanted to throw Daniel's clothes into the yard. I wanted to demand answers. Instead, I remembered something an old first sergeant once told me during a field exercise. Never move before you understand the whole battlefield. He wasn't talking about marriage. But the advice still fit. That weekend, Daniel suggested we host a family barbecue after Judith and Harold returned from their vacation. Vacation. The word almost made me laugh. Sounds nice, I said. They've missed you. I'm sure they have. Daniel smiled. You know, Mom says you've been distant lately. I looked him straight in the eyes. Has she? He nodded without the slightest hint of guilt. Then he kissed my forehead and walked into the kitchen. A minute later, my phone buzzed. Linda. Just one sentence. We found someone willing to talk. And it's not who you think. I had no idea that the person about to change everything wasn't Daniel's accountant. It was the woman he'd been risking our marriage for. I expected Daniel's mistress to slam the door in my face. Instead, she answered my phone call with one exhausted sentence. I've been wondering when you'd find me. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 38, worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative out of Waco, and sounded nothing like the woman I'd imagined over the past few weeks. She sounded tired. Linda had arranged the meeting in her office so neither of us would feel ambushed. When Emily walked in, she looked nervous enough to leave. She stopped a few feet away from me. I'm sorry. There wasn't a speech. There weren't excuses. Just 2 words. I nodded toward the chair across from me. Please sit. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Emily broke the silence. I didn't know. I looked at her carefully. You knew he was married? Yes. Then what didn't you know? Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know he was still your husband. I frowned. Emily reached into her purse and placed several printed emails on the conference table. He told me the divorce was finished last winter. She pointed to one email. He said you refused to sign the paperwork. Another page. He told me you'd already moved on to the base permanently. Another. He said you hadn't shared a bedroom in over 3 years. Each lie felt strangely smaller than the last. Not because they didn't matter, because Daniel had been telling so many of them that he could no longer remember which version belonged to which person. Emily looked directly at me. I asked why he still wore his wedding ring. What did he say? He said taking it off would create problems with clients. I couldn't help it. A short laugh escaped me. The first real laugh I'd had in weeks. Emily smiled weakly. I know how ridiculous that sounds now. No. I shook my head. It sounds exactly like something Daniel would say. For the first time that afternoon, the tension eased. Not much, just enough for both of us to breathe. Linda spent the next hour asking careful questions. When did the relationship begin? About 11 months ago. Did you ever meet Daniel's parents? Emily nodded. Several times. My stomach tightened. How did he introduce you? She looked embarrassed. As the woman he'd marry after the divorce. I looked down at the table. There it was, confirmation. Judith and Harold hadn't simply tolerated the affair. They had encouraged it. Emily continued, they invited me to Thanksgiving. I slowly lifted my head. Thanksgiving? I thought you were visiting relatives last Thanksgiving. I'd spent 4 days at Fort Bliss helping coordinate emergency logistics after severe flooding in West Texas. Daniel had told me his parents decided to keep the holiday small because everyone was tired. Instead, they'd celebrated with her. As painful as the conversation was, something unexpected happened. I stopped seeing Emily as my enemy. She had believed a different set of lies than I had. We weren't competing. We had both been manipulated by the same man. Linda finally leaned back. Emily, would you be willing to testify if this goes to court? She didn't answer immediately. She stared out the window toward Lady Bird Lake. Then she nodded. Yes. Why? Emily folded her hands. Because yesterday I found out he proposed to another woman. Linda and I both looked up. Emily gave a bitter little laugh. I guess neither of us was the only one. For the first time since all this began, Daniel's carefully controlled world showed its first real crack. He hadn't just betrayed one woman. He'd been juggling 3. and none of them knew about the others. As Linda quietly gathered the documents into a folder, she looked at me and said, "Rachel, I've handled divorce cases for 32 years. She paused. "I've never seen someone destroy his own case this thoroughly." The deposition was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in early September at the Bell County Courthouse in Belton. I woke before dawn, just like I always did on duty days. For a few minutes, I sat on the edge of my bed listening to the quiet house. It felt strange knowing this would probably be the last morning Daniel and I would ever spend under the same roof. Not because I wanted him to stay, because I never imagined 18 years of marriage would end inside a courtroom. I put on my Army service uniform with the same care I used before promotion ceremonies. Every ribbon, every button, every crease. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because that uniform represented something Daniel had spent months trying to destroy: my integrity. When Linda met me outside the courthouse, she smiled. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." "You don't have to win every argument today. You only have to tell the truth." Those words stayed with me all morning. Inside the courtroom, Daniel was already seated beside his attorney. He looked confident, almost relaxed. Judith and Harold sat directly behind him. Judith wouldn't even look at me. Harold managed a brief nod before lowering his eyes. I wondered if he felt ashamed, or simply defeated. Judge Eleanor Watkins entered exactly at 9 o'clock. She had silver hair, reading glasses balanced low on her nose, and the calm voice of someone who had spent decades listening to people explain why none of their bad decisions were really their fault. After several procedural matters, testimony began. Linda called Maria first. Maria looked terrified. She'd never testified in court before. Judge Watkins smiled kindly. "Take your time." Maria described returning to the house for her medication. She explained hearing voices, then seeing Daniel kissing another woman. She never exaggerated. She never guessed. She simply answered each question honestly. When Daniel's attorney tried to suggest she'd misunderstood what she'd seen, Maria quietly replied, "I cleaned that house every week for 10 years. She looked directly at him. "I know the difference between greeting someone and kissing them." A few people in the courtroom smiled. Even the judge's expression softened for a moment. Next came Emily. She admitted the affair without trying to excuse herself. "I made mistakes," she said. "I believed a man who lied to both of us." Then Linda introduced dozens of text messages, emails, photographs, and financial records. Every piece fit together like pages from the same story. Daniel became noticeably quieter. Finally, Linda requested permission to display the home security footage. The courtroom lights dimmed. The video appeared on a large monitor. Everyone watched silently as Daniel wrapped his arms around Emily inside our living room. Then came another clip, Judith walking inside, smiling, laughing, handing Daniel the envelope labeled attorney. No one spoke. Another clip followed, Harold helping carry boxes from the garage into his truck over several weekends, then bank records showing property transfers during the same period. The evidence wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. And somehow that made it even more powerful. Daniel finally took the stand. His attorney tried to repair the damage. "Mr. Morgan, were these financial decisions made in good faith?" "Yes." "Did you intend to harm your wife?" "No." Linda stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Morgan," she held up his phone records, "would you please explain why you texted Captain Morgan that your parents had safely landed in Seattle, when security footage shows all three of you eating takeout in her dining room?" The courtroom became so quiet I could hear the air conditioning. Daniel looked toward his attorney, toward his parents, toward me. For the first time since this began, he had nowhere left to hide. Judge Watkins didn't announce her decision that morning. Instead, she recessed for lunch and told both attorneys she would return at 1:30 with her ruling. Those 2 hours felt longer than the previous 2 months combined. Linda and I walked across the street to a small diner called the Gin at Nolan Creek. I'd eaten there once after a military ceremony years earlier, but I couldn't remember a thing about the food. The waitress brought sweet tea and asked if we wanted to hear the specials. Linda smiled politely. "We're still deciding." As soon as the waitress walked away, she looked at me. "How are you holding up?" I stared out the window. I thought I'd feel angry. "I mostly feel tired." She nodded. "That's more common than you think." For the first time since Maria's phone call, I realized revenge had quietly stopped being my goal. I didn't need Daniel to suffer. I needed the truth to matter. That was different. When court resumed, every seat in the gallery was occupied. Word had spread through the courthouse that this wasn't just another divorce case. Judge Watkins adjusted her glasses and opened a thick folder. "I have reviewed the testimony, financial records, electronic communications, and video evidence submitted by both parties." Her voice remained calm. "The court finds overwhelming evidence that Mr. Morgan intentionally concealed marital assets, misrepresented financial information, and transferred jointly owned property in anticipation of divorce." Daniel slowly lowered his head. His attorney closed his eyes. Judge Watkins continued. "The transfer of the Burnett County property to Judith Morgan for $1 is declared a fraudulent conveyance." Judith gasped. The judge didn't even look up. "Ownership will immediately revert to the marital estate pending final distribution." Linda quietly squeezed my hand beneath the table. The ruling continued for nearly 20 minutes. Every hidden transaction was addressed. Every unexplained transfer. Every attempt to move money beyond my reach. The judge ordered Daniel to reimburse the missing investment funds, including the money spent renovating the lake cabin. She awarded me the marital home in Killeen. Daniel would keep his financial planning business, but only after paying a substantial equalization settlement and covering most of the legal fees because of his misconduct during discovery. Then came something I hadn't expected. Judge Watkins looked directly at Daniel. "Marriage sometimes fails. Dishonesty is what turned this case into something far more serious." No one spoke. Not even Daniel. Outside the courthouse, the Texas heat hit us like an oven. Daniel hurried toward the parking lot without saying a word. Judith called after him. He kept walking. Harold lingered behind. For a moment, I considered leaving. Instead, I waited. He slowly approached me. "I owe you an apology." His shoulders looked smaller than I remembered. "I should have stopped this." I told myself it wasn't my business. He looked toward the courthouse. "It became my business the day I stayed quiet." I believed he meant it. But some apologies arrive too late to repair what's broken. "I hope you find peace, Harold." He nodded once. "So do I." Then he walked away. Before we reached the parking garage, I stopped. "Linda." She turned. "Yes?" "I'd like to do something." "What is it?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "I want to pay off Maria's mortgage." Linda laughed. "I had a feeling you'd say something like that." 6 months later, I found myself driving back to Austin Bergstrom International Airport. The morning looked almost identical to the day everything had changed. The same stretch of Highway 71, the same rolling Texas hills, even the same radio station playing old country songs. Only this time, I wasn't rushing anywhere. I was picking up my younger sister Claire, who was flying in from North Carolina for Thanksgiving. As I pulled into the arrivals lane, I realized something that surprised me. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The airport no longer reminded me of betrayal. It reminded me of survival. Life had settled into a new rhythm. I was still serving at Fort Cavazos, though I had recently accepted a promotion that came with more responsibility and a small office overlooking the motor pool. The work kept me busy. The soldiers kept me grounded. Every morning started the same way: coffee before sunrise, physical training, morning briefing, paperwork that somehow multiplied overnight. It wasn't glamorous. But it was honest. And after everything that had happened, honesty felt like a gift. Maria still worked for me. Although if you asked either of us, we'd probably say she was family now. The day after the divorce became final, I surprised her with an envelope. Inside was the paperwork showing her mortgage had been paid in full. She cried before she even finished reading it. "Rachel, you didn't have to. You spent 10 years taking care of my home. I only did what anyone should do." "No." She shook her head. "I only did what was right." I smiled. "And that's exactly why you deserved it." She hugged me so tightly I thought we might both fall over. To this day, she still insists on bringing homemade tamales every Christmas Eve. I still pretend to argue about it. She still ignores me. Some traditions are worth keeping. As for Daniel, I stopped checking on his life. Not because I forgave him, because I no longer needed to know. I heard bits and pieces through mutual friends. His financial planning business lost several longtime clients after the divorce became public. The lake cabin was sold. He moved into a small apartment outside Temple. Whether he found happiness after that, I honestly don't know. And for the first time in a long while, I realized I didn't care. That wasn't bitterness. It was freedom. One Saturday each month, I began volunteering with a support group for military spouses going through divorce. I never stood at the front of the room pretending to have all the answers. I simply told my story. Sometimes we'd laugh. Sometimes we'd cry. Sometimes we'd sit in comfortable silence because everyone understood without needing any words. One afternoon, a woman about my age stayed behind after the meeting. She quietly asked, "How did you stop wanting revenge?" I thought about that for a moment. I didn't. I just realized revenge wasn't what I really wanted. "What did you want?" "The truth." I smiled. And once the truth had a chance to speak for itself, I didn't have to carry the anger anymore. She nodded slowly. I think she understood. As I watched Claire walk out of the terminal with her suitcase, she waved both arms like she always had since we were kids. I laughed and waved back. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was peaceful. Looking back, I understand something I couldn't see that day in the parking lot when Maria told me to check the cameras. The video didn't destroy my life. It revealed the truth before even more years were lost. Sometimes the hardest moments become the ones that quietly set us free. If you've ever had a moment when the truth changed the direction of your life, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Until next time, take good care of yourself, and never underestimate the quiet strength that comes from choosing honesty over anger.